Good morning, BSides CT 2020. Good morning. How you guys doing today? Our first talk for the red track today is by Chris Ante. I think you guys are really going to like this talk. He's going to talk about cryptocurrency, blockchain, ransomware, and then at the end of his talk, he's going to bring it all together for you and make it all sense, and you'll see where everything just meets up on these three different technologies. So let me bring Chris in now.
Can you guys see me and hear me?
I can hear you, Chris. Thanks
Okay.
for joining us.
Awesome.
All right, take it away.
Okay. Well, big thanks to the BSides Connecticut team for giving me the opportunity to speak. I think a positive of having these virtual conferences, especially during the global pandemic, is that I guess people from other geographically located areas are able to participate in conferences like this. So I'm not part of I'm not located near the Connecticut, New England area. So I think it's really cool that I have this opportunity. So thank you for that. Let me share my screen. Okay. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay, so what I'm going to be talking about today is cryptocurrency and the evolving threat of ransomware. Thank you guys again for joining pretty early on a Saturday, but I think this topic is pretty interesting. So hopefully it'll keep you guys awake and involved and just interested in general. So I guess just as a general disclaimer, the stuff I'll talk about in this presentation was research and done in my own individual accord and on my own time. It's not representative of MITRE's views on the technologies or some of the different concepts that I'm talking about here. So just want to lay that out there. So quick intro about myself. So I work for the MITRE Corporation as a cybersecurity engineer. If you're not familiar with MITRE, we are a not-for-profit that works in the public interest. So that means working with the federal government, working with state and local governments, but also putting out public solutions for the general community to use, whether it be in information security, healthcare, aerospace. We cover a bunch of different technology domains. But my focus at MITRE is working on cyber threat intelligence. And some of you might be familiar with the attack framework. And I believe there was also a workshop on this yesterday, if you guys had the chance to attend it. Unfortunately, I wasn't. But if you're not familiar, attack stands for the adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge framework. And it's basically a knowledge base of adversarial tactics and techniques that have been used in the wild by legitimate threat actors, whether it be from nation states or cyber criminals, and really just building upon threat intelligence gathered from reporting and incorporating that into your own security posture, whether it be through red teaming, security operations, defensive operations. There's a bunch of different use cases, and I could talk about attack for a while, but that's a little bit about my current position. So some of my interests, like I mentioned, cyber threat intelligence, adversary emulation. So that's combining red teaming plus threat intelligence from legitimate reporting and adversaries techniques and combining that all together. Industrial control systems and the Internet of Things, blockchain, hence why I'm talking about this specific topic, cloud. Some of my previous roles include working as a technology consultant at IBM, where I worked with a lot of these new emerging technologies. That's actually how I kind of got my start in blockchain, cloud, DevSecOps, and I think just the evolving nature of technology and how it manages to change and become vastly different on a yearly basis is really exciting. And I think this is definitely the field to be in. So before at IBM, before my position at IBM, I worked as the program director of cybersecurity for the National Student Leadership Conference. This was a leadership conference for high school students where I would teach both technical cyber skills as well as leadership skills for them to get excited about, becoming eventual leaders in the field if this is something that they did want to pursue down the line. So I'm also pursuing a master's in applied intelligence just to supplement and build upon my just overall interest and passion around cyber threat intelligence and understanding adversary intent, the cultural context behind why certain cyber criminals, nation states, hacktivists go about the actions that they participate in. So I am also pursuing that. In my free time, I love to play piano. If you could see a picture here, I guess my collection, and it shows a variety of different fandoms or different media forms that I'm a fan of. So Baby Yoda, Pikachu, so on and so forth. The picture on the left is a picture of me attempting to birdwatch. Unfortunately, I don't think in this specific picture that I was able to see any actual birds, but it's something I've also picked up during quarantine, which is a pretty nice, social distancing activity. And it's really relaxing to just kind of get out there and enjoy the simple things in life, like birds. And then I will tell this to everyone normally as my first icebreaker, but I'm heavily anti-pineapple on pizza. Feel free to discuss that with me after this presentation in Discord, or shoot me a tweet. I'll share my contact info. But we can have a discussion about that. Just know that I'm big anti-pineapple on pizza. So I don't have an outline slide, but I guess I'll talk about what the general topics that will be covered in this presentation. So first off, I'll start talking about the general technology behind blockchain, how it operates, some attacks on the blockchain, the history of ransomware dating back to the early 90s and making its way to the present day, and how some of the techniques of deploying ransomware and just the way ransomware operates has evolved throughout the past 2 decades or so. And then comparing different cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and Monero, which is a privacy coin. It's a cryptocurrency that is focused and has security and privacy built into it. And I'll explain the differences between those. And then towards the end, I'll try to bring it all together and, relate it back to our current situation and stuff you should be, I guess, just generally wary about. So another quick disclaimer, this presentation is not going to be me pitching any specific cryptocurrency. I'm solely going to be talking about the technologies and how cryptocurrencies are used by malicious actors from a pretty high level. I won't dive too deep into any one specific topic, but hopefully you'll carry out from this conversation and this presentation and be able to give a quick elevator pitch to someone if they were to ask you, could you give me a quick primer on what blockchain is? Like, I always hear about it on the news. Or how do I invest in cryptocurrency? You won't learn how to invest in cryptocurrency, but you'll have a better understanding of what it is, why it's important, and why just the general world is starting to really keep their eyes on it. It's been pretty popular, I'd say, for the past 5 years or so, but it's continuing to grow in popularity, and the technology has a lot of implications and useful use cases that, if used correctly, can definitely be beneficial to society in general. So quick disclaimer there, no stonks. So what is blockchain? And a really simple way to think of it is that it's essentially a digital record or a ledger. So a ledger is the term that the blockchain security community likes to use, but it's essentially a digital record of transactions. Just a large, I'm hesitant to call it a database, but it's essentially a record of all these different transactions. And I guess what differentiates itself from a traditional database are these key characteristics here. So the first one is immutability. So every time a transaction is added to a blockchain network, it can never be changed. That ensures integrity and just ensures that people operating on the blockchain don't do things they're not supposed to. And obviously there are caveats to this that I'll cover in a little bit, but generally blockchains are immutable. Decentralization. So the idea of a blockchain network is that people operate blockchain nodes, and that could just be a server that they're running on their house or in their house, on a device running a specific blockchain node. And if that specific node goes down, the blockchain network will continue to persist, ensuring that there's no single point of failure, rather than a centralized database being behind some bank pay system. And if a malicious actor takes down that database, then that's a huge data breach, and it'd be very hard for that specific organization to recover because it was centralized in one location. So fault tolerance is really key in just the concept of a blockchain network, and it being distributed. So anyone can host a blockchain network, depending on the specific blockchain, of course, but it kind of falls in with the past point about blockchain being decentralized. Transparency. So this is really important. With most blockchains, especially Bitcoin and other popular cryptocurrencies, like Litecoin, Ethereum, you could go out and go on a specific website, which we'll do later on in this presentation, and look at all the historical transactions and data that have occurred on the blockchain network. So in this case, for Bitcoin, you can go back as far as 2009 and just download all the historical data and just do a quick analysis of how transactions have changed, and just examine the characteristics and different transactions that have happened throughout the years. And arguably the most important point is that blockchain is intended to be secure by using really complex cryptographic protocols. And again, there are caveats to this. And I think a problem that a lot of non-technical users, or really people who don't understand blockchain, is they assume blockchain is the end-all be-all solution to a backend, or once they implement quote unquote blockchain into their enterprise or their network or in some application in some way, that it will solve all their problems and they won't have to worry about that. But obviously, as security professionals, we know that's not the case. And honestly, in my opinion, there's no perfect system. I'm not sure if other people have differing opinions, but considering the evolving technological landscape, there will never be a perfectly secure system because of human error and, again, the evolving technological landscape. So those are the key characteristics of a blockchain. And here's just a quick infographic of how it works. So a user will request a transaction. That transaction is represented in a block. That block is then broadcasted to the nodes that are hosting the blockchain network. So all the different servers and devices that are hosting that specific blockchain network. Those nodes then validate that transaction. And once that validation happens, that block is added to the chain, thus making a blockchain. And the transaction is confirmed and executed. So hopefully all of you now know just generally how a blockchain works and how transactions are added. And that, I guess, what I just talked about is pretty much the same across all types of blockchains. There are nuances between different cryptocurrencies and different use cases, but in general, that's how they operate. So speaking of use cases, besides cryptocurrency, there are some pretty significant use cases that are in the works right now in academia and research and even industry that are trying to implement blockchain. So the first one is digital identity, being able to prove who you are and making sure your identity isn't compromised in some way. And blockchain is a technology that could potentially help in bridging together that gap between identification and making sure not too much personal information is leaked out than necessary. Supply chain is another good use case. So making sure all the parts of maybe your hardware components or a computer that you're trying to build or any kind of hardware components along the supply chain get to the place that they need to, and again, aren't tampered with or aren't stolen. And, they're not meant to, be tampered with in some way. And so that supply chain is a very useful use case for blockchain right now. Health IT, so this is similar to digital identity in a way, just making sure that both your IT health networks are secure, but also making sure that your personal health information is, it doesn't get into the hands of people that shouldn't be seeing this information on a health IT network. And then finances, of course. So that brings us to cryptocurrency. And you might recognize some of the cryptocurrencies here, but let me see if I can do can I do a laser pointer? Yeah, I can. Awesome. So this one right here is Bitcoin. You probably all recognize it in some capacity. You've seen it on the news or just talked about. This is Monero. This is the logo for Monero, the privacy coin I mentioned at the beginning of the talk. This is Ripple, Litecoin, Ethereum, and then Dogecoin. So you've probably seen this memed on pretty often. But these are some of the most popular cryptocurrencies. And this infograph, I believe, I'm not sure if this is the one from May or if I updated it, but just know that generally these are the top 10 most popular cryptocurrencies, at all times. And Bitcoin and Ethereum will always essentially be at the top. And let's actually talk about some of the differences between cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So with Bitcoin, a thing to keep in mind is that Bitcoin is really just an application of a blockchain network. And the purpose of Bitcoin is to serve as a digital currency platform. Whereas something like Ethereum is built off blockchain, but Ethereum itself is an application platform. It's a computing platform that has cryptocurrency functionality. So Ethereum's cryptocurrency is actually called Ether, but the Ethereum platform allows for robust applications to be built on the Ethereum blockchain. And one of the most important features of Ethereum is something called smart contracts, which allows users on the Ethereum network to execute certain business rules for their application. And that's a really high level way of putting it, but the way it's implemented allows users to add in additional complex features that will only execute transactions, modify transactions when a certain condition is met. And this is something that isn't offered in Bitcoin. So the consensus algorithm is how a Bitcoin or Ethereum is collected. So you might have heard of Bitcoin mining. That essentially is trying to solve really complex mathematical cryptographic problems to be able to earn Bitcoin. And the point to where it is now, Bitcoin mining is quite difficult. There are dedicated cities in China. You might have heard of this in the news, but there are dedicated mining cities in China that are running 24/7 just trying to mine Bitcoin. But as it's grown throughout the years and since its conception in 2009, it's become that much more increasingly difficult to mine Bitcoin and Ethereum. So Ethereum right now also works on the same consensus algorithm, but they're moving towards what's called proof of stake. A proof of stake protocol means that the more, I guess, presence or the more stake, for lack of a better term, that you have in the Ethereum network, the more mining power you'll have. So what does that mean? That means if you operate an Ethereum node, that gives you that much more ability to successfully mine Ethereum. And this is still incredibly difficult, but it gives a little incentive for community users in the community to help contribute back to cryptocurrency and just blockchain in general, because it is so community driven. And blockchain really is dependent on its users from all around the world and all over the community. And just a quick thing. So Bitcoin has a max supply of 21 million. So once 21 million Bitcoin have been mined, there will be no more Bitcoin. Whereas Ethereum, or I should say Ether, the cryptocurrency, there's no fixed supply for that. So there are some specific cryptocurrency attacks, and they can be bundled into about three buckets, I want to say. There's more categories in this, but in general, these are some of the more popular and documented cryptocurrency attacks that have happened throughout the years. So the first one is attempting to directly attack the blockchain network. And what the first option here is called a Sybil attack. And the way this works is that it will target the entire blockchain network, but it will be one individual or group operating under the guise of multiple blockchain or cryptocurrency addresses. So from an outside perspective, it may look like the addresses that are operating on the blockchain network are happening from different individuals, but really it's one collective group or one individual who's trying to gain influence on that blockchain network. So that's a Sybil attack. The 51% attack. So this is similar to building upon the proof of stake protocol. This means that if you control 51% of the mining power on a blockchain network, theoretically, you can influence the blockchain network to function in ways that it wasn't necessarily intended to. So this would allow you to change historical transactions, modify transactions, double spend. And the concept of double spending is essentially, buying cryptocurrency and doubling your money in a way that is not meant to be within the bounds of the blockchain network. And this is only doable on smaller or newer blockchain networks. And again, this is theoretical, but a 51% attack is not feasible on a Bitcoin or Ethereum network, Litecoin, one of the more popular blockchain networks. So a smart contract based attack is the next attack that is a direct attack on the blockchain network. And the most popular example of this smart contract based attack was the decentralized autonomous organization attack. And this was a vulnerability actually in the Ether cryptocurrency where the smart contract was susceptible to being exploited with its withdraw feature. And before that final confirmation from all the blockchain nodes operating on the Ethereum network, malicious actor was able to pull out funds. And I think it was something about like $100 million worth USD worth in Ethereum that they were able to exploit out of the DAO attack. So pretty big stuff. So that covers blockchain attacks. The second bucket is cryptojacking. So this is essentially turning devices in a network into tools that'll help you mine a specific cryptocurrency. So this involves maliciously taking over someone's desktop, a laptop, a phone, and adding them into a malicious mining network. So cryptojacking is quite popular as well. And then ransomware. So we're going to dive a little deeper into this, but ransomware in its simplicity is it's malware that will encrypt and lock your files until a certain financial amount is paid to the malicious actor that deployed the ransomware onto your account. So let's talk about a brief history of ransomware and just how it's evolved throughout the years. So this screenshot is from 1991, and I want to bet that some of you probably didn't know that ransomware was around this early, or I guess the concept of holding a ransom and deploying a computer malware onto someone's device for a certain amount of money. But with this specific piece of ransomware, or this is referred to as the AIDS or PC Cyborg ransomware. And it was coined AIDS because this was mailed to, I believe, an AIDS research distribution mailing list, and PC Cyborg because that was a fake organization that the malicious actors would, make these victims pay out the certain payment to. So you could see the note here, full amount of $189 or $378. And the way this would work was once it made its way onto the victim's machine, and normally this, like I mentioned, this was through a mailing list. So typical spear phishing or phishing attachment that would be clicked on by the victim, and it would encrypt the C drive. So this was a Windows operated malware. It would encrypt the C drive after 90 boots, and it would replace the batch script with a Trojan horse that would then load this message after 90 boots. So this is one of the first, really popular instances of ransomware, but people kind of just dusted it off and, went about their business, not really worrying about computer security or the idea of ransomware around this time. So let's jump ahead quite a few years. So this is, I think this operating system is XP. I could be wrong, or 2003. But this this ransomware is called Archivais. And again, it would operate very similarly to how a normal ransomware would work. It would load itself onto the victim machine, and you'd be prompted with a message to make a certain financial payment to a certain address or a certain victim, or not victim, certain malicious actor. And keep in mind, this could be in cash, this could be in a check order, this could be in gift cards. At this time, there were a variety of different methods and I guess options that malicious actors would ask their victims to pay out their ransoms to. So again, this would encrypt the user's files, and you would be given the password after making the certain payment. So luckily in 2006, the password was cracked to Archivais. So if you're one of the unlucky souls to somehow get hit by Archivais, or for some reason are running Windows XP or Windows 2003 in a VM and you get hit by Archivais, the password is easily Googleable or searchable. I don't know if Googleable is a word, but you could easily search it up and just paste it in, and you're free to go. But I hope you guys aren't running XP or 2003 unless you're trying to test your buffer overflows or something like that. So moving on, this is, and some of you guys might have come across this in just your daily lives or just your experiences throughout the years, but this is referred to as what's called police ransomware. So this ransomware would make its way to a victim's machine and operate under the guise of scaring you into thinking that the operator of this ransomware is from a legitimate federal agency. So it's not specific to the US. This could happen across the globe in any specific country, and they could use the scare tactics of the federal government spying on you to coerce you to making a certain payment out. And they throw all these different legal terms, 17 US code S512, to make it seem very official, and that the government is legitimately tracking what you're doing. So collected technical data, some of the information that they'll present back to you, like your IP address, your internet service provider, the operating system that you're using, some of the things that you might be doing, even if you're not engaging in these things. Again, scare tactics to coerce you to making a payment. And keep in mind, the federal government will never ask you to make payments like this, especially out of the blue, and scare tactics like this. And in the InfoSec community, we all basically know this at this point. But to help out our relatives and maybe those who aren't as keen on proper cyber hygiene and security practices, just be sure to, I guess, brief them and let them know that if they do come across something like this, to not fall into the tricks and fall into the fancy emblems. You could literally just look up the NSA logo on Google and paste it on your image, and somehow it's officially NSA official. So and then throwing in the SWAT team in there too. Don't fall into this. I'm sure all of us are keenly aware of this, but again, a proper cybersecurity and proper infrastructure in cyberspace really requires all of us to share the wealth and share the information. So this was police ransomware, and this specific version of police ransomware was called Revitin. And I guess a side thing to note was that I think around July 2013, this was when it was pretty popular. The OS X version would use JavaScript iframes, and every time you would close a certain pop-up window, another one would pop up. So it was really annoying when you would be hit by Revitin and you would be forced to run like a hard reset on your computer. And when you open it back up, the ransomware would still be there, and you'd be falling back into the endless clicking war with the Revitin ransomware. So that must have been fun to deal with for whoever had to deal with this unfortunate situation. So that's around 2013, and we're jumping a little ahead to about modern times. But CryptoLocker and WannaCry. So you might have also seen these names in the news, but CryptoLocker was the first ransomware that decided to switch its demands to Bitcoin. So this was around the September 2013 and May 2014 timeline, and there was a large international effort to take down the botnet that helped propagate CryptoLocker among all these different machines that were affected by CryptoLocker. And the private key, luckily, or all the different private keys to unlock the CryptoLocker affected machines were stored on the malicious actors command and control server. So the international operation carried out by, I believe, Europol, the U.S. Department of Justice, Interpol, all these different organizations collaborated together to retrieve these private keys. So those affected by CryptoLocker could unlock their computers once again. And then jumping about 3 years to WannaCry, so May 2017, and this was huge. WannaCry affected a ton of out-of-band Windows devices that weren't properly patched, and the group that was behind WannaCry, the shadow brokers, utilized the NSA exploit Eternal Blue. And Eternal Blue is an exploit targeted towards SMB, or the server message block. And this exploit worked on a ton of outdated Windows machines across the world. And it made it, or this obviously got Microsoft's attention. So Microsoft released out-of-band security updates for a lot of these machines, but at that time, these machines were already affected by Eternal Blue. So it was hard to recover some of the damage that shadow brokers already did. And this was attributed back to North Korea at some point. And then I also have August 2018 listed here as a date because that was the most recent variant of WannaCry that hit Taiwanese semiconductor manufacturing companies. And again, these are new demands because they started to request Bitcoin rather than your traditional check, cash, gift card order. And cryptocurrency was evolving in its popularity at this time. So taking a look at our timeline now, we're about around the 2018 timeline. And this is an infographic from IBM Security showing that during 2018, ransomware actually started to decline, and cryptojacking, like I mentioned earlier in the presentation, started to increase its popularity by a lot, actually. It increased pretty steadily throughout the year in 2018. But despite ransomware's decline in 2018, I'm sure many of you are familiar that ransomware has not gone away by any means. If anything, it has blown up, especially in the past month or so. So some of the new age ransomware that will be covered. The first one is Ryuk. And some of you guys might have heard of Ryuk in the news because it actually has been in the news pretty recently. There was a huge, story around the TrickBot botnet that would help propagate the Ryuk ransomware. And there were separate takedowns by both the Microsoft threat hunting team and U.S. Cyber Command that worked to take down both TrickBot and Ryuk. And Ryuk is in its own separate field as well because it's also been largely targeting health IT networks. The most recent example I can think of was the takedown of the United Health Systems health IT networks, and it was very detrimental. So this specific news headline, I believe, was from a couple years ago, but this was when Ryuk was starting to get popular, and the way it started to evolve is ransomware traditionally would target individuals, but now it's starting to target actual critical infrastructure like oil and gas facilities, hospitals, like I mentioned, and then using and targeting specific infrastructure like Active Directory. So Active Directory is used in I believe it's 95% of enterprise IT networks around the world nowadays. So the version of, I guess, ransomware nowadays is that it's beginning to target more of these low hanging fruit that are, really beneficial and essential for individuals and just normal businesses to go about their daily operations. So PureLocker is an interesting case because the way this ransomware works is that it uses the programming language Pure Basic, which is a fork off the basic programming language. So one of the first really popular programming languages that some of you might have experience with, but it's built off Pure Basic, and it made it really difficult for AV and threat intel companies to detect this at first because Pure Basic is so underutilized, and it was pretty unusual that they would pick this specific technology, but it seemed to work in the malicious actors' favor at the time. So I thought that was worth noting. And then the Sodino Kibi, or the easier way to say that is RE Evil, but RE Evil and Ryuk, they fall into a family of ransomware that most of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, but it falls into what's called ransomware as a service. And the way ransomware as a service works is that it functions very similar to just a regular business model. These ads for RAS are scattered all across the dark web. And, once you come across an ad that's advertising RAS or just any general ransomware as a service, they're meant to be very easily deployed. So you hire the specific threat actor, you tell them the target that they want you to, or that you want them to send ransomware to, and it's a very low effort on your end. And these ransomware kits are scalable based on the package that you want to give the specific cyber criminal or threat actor that is willing to propagate and release this ransomware onto whoever you want to send this ransomware to. Don't go around doing that, but if that's the mindset of malicious actors. And these are some of the screenshots that you'll find for RAS scattered across the dark web. So like I mentioned, they really will try to sell it as a market pitch, telling you that it's fully customizable. You'll get 50% off the decryption price. And it will just tell you the different features that are offered with the different versions of ransomware as a service that are scattered across the dark web. And an important thing to note about these ransomwares is that they really heavily emphasize the use of cryptocurrency. Bitcoin is really popular, but RE Evil specifically, so going back a few, this specific ransomware suite started to recently make the switch to Monero. And again, like I mentioned, Monero is a privacy coin, but just keep that in the back of your minds. And that is definitely an important point that I will touch upon in a little bit. So let's talk about the traceability and trackability of Bitcoin. So like I mentioned, blockchain in general is quite transparent, and you can go on a website like blockchain.info and look at historical transactions that have happened throughout the longevity of the cryptocurrencies network. In this case, it's Bitcoin, and Bitcoin is one of the most transparent. There are definitely security features and different techniques that you can use to limit your traceability on the blockchain network. But in general, you're able to pull out some pretty juicy information if you decide to start an investigation on maybe a Bitcoin address or a transaction that might look a little malicious to you, might look a little suspicious, but you need a little more info. So you would come to a website like blockchain.info and start your investigation. So this is my pseudo demo. These are just in screenshots, but clicking on this transaction hash right here will bring us to a summary of the transaction. So this Bitcoin address is sending about half a Bitcoin, or 0.44 Bitcoin, to this Bitcoin address. And blockchain.info and all these different blockchain tracing websites will give you the ability to look at the metadata and information of this specific Bitcoin address. So clicking on the 39 VABs address, it'll tell us that 2 transactions took place. It received 0.44 Bitcoin, but it also sent out 0.44 Bitcoin out of this address. So that's some of the information that you could pull out from Blockchain Explorer from the get-go. But what if we wanted to learn a little more information about this specific Bitcoin address? We could go to bitcoinwhoswho.com and we can plug in this address to see if we can gain any more information on the specific Bitcoin address, whether it's been involved in some fraudulent scam, whether it's been spotted on the dark web. And that's really the key feature of Bitcoin Who's Who, providing users the ability to manually update and generate reports of specific Bitcoin addresses that might seem malicious or they've had some bad interaction with, and Bitcoin Who's Who will flag that Bitcoin address as a scam or potentially malicious. So if we click on search here, I'm going to act like I'm clicking on the search button. This will give us more information than we were able to pull out from just the general transaction history searching website for this specific Bitcoin address. So it tells us that it belongs to this wallet name. And a cryptocurrency wallet is essentially where you store your cryptocurrency, you share out cryptocurrency transactions, and normally you will, or individuals or groups that operate wallets will have multiple Bitcoin addresses associated with this wallet. And then there's wallet searching software out there as well. You could look up blockchain wallet or Bitcoin wallet searcher on your favorite search engine and plug this wallet name into there as well. It'll tell you the current balance of this Bitcoin address, again, how much it's received, how much, I guess it doesn't show how much it's sent out, but it shows you how much it's received, the transactions that were sent out, how many transactions have happened in general, the dates of the first and last transactions, a lot of good information for an OSINT investigator, open source intelligence, or really anyone just trying to probe around on the blockchain and collect more information. So that's Bitcoin Who's Who, just kind of a theoretical way to do an investigation. If we were to do a specific use case, you guys might remember from a few months ago, former President Barack Obama generously gave the option of people sending $1,000 to this Bitcoin address, and because he's so gracious as a president, he was willing to double your payment back to yourself. So people sent this over, crossing their fingers and really just hoping that they would get back double the amount of their money. Lo and behold, this was a typical scam, the double spending scam that some of you might be familiar with on video game platforms like RuneScape. This was a scam that's happened all throughout the video game industry. But with this specific incident, it wasn't just Barack Obama's Twitter account that was compromised. Elon Musk's and I believe Coinbase too. Just a variety of different high-profile Twitter accounts were compromised, but they all had this specific Bitcoin address. So for those who were interested or just have general interest in looking into cryptocurrencies, providing this Bitcoin address had these different Bitcoin investigators, researchers, cryptocurrency researchers foaming at the mouth. This is good information to start your investigation off of. So if we were to do that, follow the same methods that we tried before, we'll plug this Bitcoin address into blockchain.info, and we see, again, the number of transactions that have happened. A lot of people fell for this Bitcoin scam, unfortunately. It received over 12 Bitcoin. And if you do the conversions, I think Bitcoin is at about 15,000 USD right now. So this equal, I don't want to do that math in my head right now, but I think at the time, Bitcoin, 12.8 Bitcoin equaled out to about 150,000 US dollars. And a key thing to note as an investigator is that it also sent out the total amount that it received in Bitcoin. So that tells us that the money is not persisting in this wallet. You'll see a final balance here, but that's really just the leftover cryptocurrency transaction fees that occur from transaction to transaction. So this is just arbitrary money at this point. But seeing this is really important. So as an investigator or as a infosec professional, if we want to go down deeper the rabbit hole, we could see that this Bitcoin address, the Twitter Bitcoin address, sent it out to these addresses. And we could follow down that money trail manually. And if we want to be organized, we could use some kind of mind mapping software to keep track of Bitcoin addresses that seem interesting or seem like they can provide a little more information. But it's very easy to go down this intermingled web of different Bitcoin addresses, and the format of a Bitcoin address will they will confuse you if you decide to go down the specific rabbit hole of just manually clicking through the different transactions. And there are commercial tools out there that will help you do this. Obviously, they're commercial, so you would have to pay for them. But there are different scripts on GitHub and different open source tools that will also help automate and better organize your investigation or just your general research if you want to look into a Bitcoin address. So what we can do from here is actually plug in this Bitcoin address into Bitcoin Who's Who again. And if you notice that plugging that Bitcoin address, the BC1 Twitter address, will redirect us to this Bitcoin address. And this is obviously different, but a cool feature of Bitcoin Who's Who is because of its scam reporting functionality, it will help cross-correlate some of the information across these reports. And at some point, they were able to associate this Bitcoin address with the original BC1 Twitter Bitcoin address. And we're getting a lot of juicy information here. So 57 transactions for this address. That 57 is pretty high for a Bitcoin address in general. 400 for that Twitter Bitcoin address was very significant, but 57 is still worth noting. And now that we know that this address is associated with that original Bitcoin address, or Twitter Bitcoin scam address, I'm saying Bitcoin address a lot, we could look at the other fields that Bitcoin Who's Who can give us and use these as pivot points for different research points that we could further go to. So from here, we could see that the first transaction actually happened on May 3rd, 2020. But the Twitter Bitcoin scam happened around this time frame, so July 16th, 2020. So this gives us a timeline of the malicious actors or the cyber criminals that were operating with this specific Bitcoin address, or maybe at the time they weren't even specifically involved or planning on hacking Twitter at the time. But this gives us a timeline of different transactions we can look into and start to fingerprint who this individual might be. And probably the most important part here is that it actually gives us IP addresses for the last transaction. And I don't have a slide here for it, but if you plug this IP address into, or both IP addresses actually, into some IP geolocator, I forget which one it is, but one of them redirects to the United Kingdom. And if you look up what happened or the aftermath of the Twitter Bitcoin scam, it's actually found that one of the Twitter Bitcoin scammers, there were three of them. One of them was operating out of Florida. He was a 17-year-old. And then the other two were, I believe, like 20, 21-year-olds. But one of the older individuals was actually located in the United Kingdom as well. So, a resource like Bitcoin Who's Who is really useful in identifying some of the key information like that. And you're able to, again, it doesn't always give you information like the IP address or, when the first transaction or last transaction happened, or I should say it's not always useful. It might just be in the same day, or someone might use a Bitcoin address as an individual throwaway address and never use it again. But again, there's a lot of information that we could use off of here for our research purposes, or looking into the Bitcoin money trail. So actually, if we try to directly paste the Twitter Bitcoin address into Bitcoin Who's Who. Unfortunately, Bitcoin Who's Who doesn't process this specific format of Bitcoin address. I believe it's a functionality that they're working to implement. But luckily, because of that cross correlation from the past slide, we were able to get the information we needed to at least continue on with our research. So that generally covers, very high level, collecting open source intelligence on Bitcoin and, how easy it is to gain really significant information and collect information that could be vital to either your research, your investigation, or just your general Bitcoin cryptocurrency interests. And I kept talking about Monero in the past, but let's actually dive a little deeper into it. So if we were to attempt the same sort of methodology with Monero, TLDR, you're not going to get the same results. Again, Monero is a privacy coin. It has privacy features and security features built into its core, making it that much more difficult for investigators and researchers to trace and collect information on. So sudo demo again, if we click on, I believe it's this block hash. Regardless, so clicking on, the address that, or the hash that's offered on moneroblocks.info. So it's a similar blockchain searching website like blockchain.info for Bitcoin. It'll give us transactions that really don't tell us that much information, and actually doesn't give us the output total. So if we click on this transaction hash, again, it really doesn't give us that much information, at least compared to Bitcoin. And there's not much we can really pull out of here. And again, this is because Monero has features that are built into its core to help ensure its confidentiality. And there are two key features implemented right now, and then there's one that's actively, being worked on. The first one are what's called stealth addresses. So every transaction from outside, from an outside perspective. So if you go onto moneroblocks.info and you look at the transaction history, all those addresses are different. They're one-time addresses for the transactions, and the only ones who will know the legitimate addresses going from a receiver to a sender are the users participating in that transaction. So think of this as the end-to-end encrypted version of a transaction on a blockchain network. And Monero does this really well because of their stealth address functionality. Another key feature are what's called ring confidential transactions, or ring CT. These are built off the ring signature cryptographic protocol. I'm not a cryptography expert by any means, but in the use case of Monero, this means that from an outside perspective too, we saw that all the transactions were confidential. But if you were able to maybe get your hands on an amount or some kind of clear text amount for the funds being transacted between an address and another address, those funds will not be accurate because there are randomized funds that are thrown into every transaction meant to obfuscate the actual transaction happening between the different individuals. And then Covery. So this is a active development feature that's incorporating a technology similar to Tor, so onion routing. And again, this is just to ensure its security and privacy, which is so essential to the Monero network. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to have to burst through these next few slides a little quickly. So this is another use case, and just really shows the difficulty of tracking, a Monero address. And the U.S. Department of Treasury operates what's called the Office of Foreign Asset Controls and Specially Designated Nationals Block Persons List. That's a mouthful, but essentially they sanction certain individuals, both in normal fiat currency, so this is USDs, and then also cryptocurrencies. And you'll notice here that they've marked a Monero address, at least what they assume to be a Monero address right here. But if we were to go to the same Monero Blocks website, we'll actually see that this is a payment ID. This is an address associated to an individual. These are arbitrary outside identifiers given to a transaction, by the specific exchange that the individuals are operating on or wherever they're sending Monero from. So sanctioning the payment ID essentially does nothing. And this is really just to show how difficult it is to track Monero and point it back to a certain individual. And just honestly, applause to the Monero team, Monero research team, for putting that much effort into ensuring the security and privacy of individuals operating with Monero. But again, obviously there are there's gray area for cyber criminals now switching over to Monero and increasing their lack of traceability, I would say, making it that much more difficult for law enforcement to track them down, and they continue to operate with their illicit activities. So this is my kind of conclusion slide. So why does this all matter? In the time frame of COVID-19, we've been in quarantine for about 8-9 months now, almost the entire year, working remotely. And not everyone has this luxury, but for the InfoSec world, this is something that we have been blessed with. Working remotely definitely makes us more susceptible. We're on our devices constantly, and I think the human aspect definitely falls into this because we are so used to being around our devices and our work laptops, so often we can kind of get complacent in terms of keeping up with our cyber hygiene. So this is more of just a reminder to be resilient and make sure you're practicing safe cyber practices. Discovery of insecure software. So this was definitely key in the beginning of COVID-19. You might have remember the Zoom vulnerabilities that were going around. It's huge. TikTok, large talks around security vulnerabilities there. Just the general nature of the platform and who it's being operated by. Cybercrime has risen exponentially during COVID-19, especially in the past month. And then just in general, digital currency, in my view, is definitely going to become one of the standards of the financial industry, whether it is decentralized or centralized. So certain governments around the world have started to implement a digital currency, but is being operated by the government. So it's not necessarily blockchain based. It's not decentralized, but in general, digital currency, virtual currency will definitely become one of the norms as we begin to go through these years. And then these are some of the resources that I recommend. There's a book dedicated to investigating cryptocurrencies. There's a podcast video series dedicated to Monero and some of the vulnerabilities, and then just generally hunting cyber criminals. This is something I like to do in my free time and just do open source investigations and participate in the Trace Labs, missing persons, capture the flag competitions. Really cool stuff if you are not aware about that. With that being said, that brings me to the end of my presentation. Are there any questions? And here's my contact info. Here's my email, my Twitter. Feel free to follow me. And then my LinkedIn too. Feel free to connect with me. But does anyone have any questions? Let me take a look at Does blockchain have a use case in voting and reducing voter fraud? Yes. So great question. Obviously, from the beginning, blockchain, as an inherently secure platform, was proposed as a solution to ensuring electoral integrity and security. And honestly, I don't know all the specific reasons, but in general, blockchain is not only difficult to implement into an electoral system, voting system, but it's hard to. It becomes very muddled when it comes to being able to identify voters and ensuring that proper identifications and guardrails are in place to ensure that voter counts are not tampered with and counted. And I know that's kind of a non-answer, but blockchain is not the solution to election security. But shout out to the Cybersecurity Infrastructure and Security Agency team for providing the most secure election in American history. I think, that is a big feat in itself. And they didn't have to use blockchain. So I think that's worth noting. But down the line, I think if they're able to find a more robust solution to implementing blockchain, I think it definitely could work. I think just some of the functionality and features of privacy incorporated into blockchain are a little difficult to deconflict when it comes to being able to identify voters and confirm that voters are legitimately registered with a certain system. So other questions? Actually, there are still many. Yes, that is very crazy. Point of sale systems, I'm sure you guys know, are big targets. So yeah, they're definitely susceptible to vulnerabilities, or like the Archivist ransomware, or even 0 days that have been patched on modern day machines, but POS systems, like you mentioned, are pretty outdated. Manufacturing has plenty too. Thanks, Chris. Shout out to another Chris. Yeah, so it doesn't look like there's any other questions.
Chris, thank you very much. That was a very interesting talk. I really liked how you brought everything back at the end of your talk and made it all make sense for us. That was great.
Yeah, thanks for giving me the opportunity to talk. I had a good time.
Yeah, you're welcome. And there is a channel in our Discord under the Red Team track for your talk.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe if you want to jump in there, you might have a couple questions in there as well.
Okay, sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris.
Okay.